Do you start out thinking when you begin that it's going to be a series or a standalone?
No, I think you really have to wait until you get towards the end and realize, ask yourself, is there any juice left in these characters, or any unanswered questions? They have any more potential that I haven't explored yet? And if the answers to those questions is yes, then you might want to think about making them a series. I've written books where I knew sort of going in that it was going to be, a special story about this character, and there wasn't going to be an opportunity to bring them back. And lo and behold, get to the end, near the end of the book, and realize that I was wrong with my initial assumption. I think you have to be flexible. I don't think you should go in with any preconceived notion that's going to be a series or not a series. Let the story flow, and then see what you feel like as you get towards the end. You want to spend more time with these characters, because you really have to bring the passion again and the interest again. And if it's not there inside you, it's probably not going to end up on the pages either. So I always sort of let the story come out, and then, check to see if I want to bring them back or not, if I feel like I have something else to say about them.
Have you ever written a standalone and then, like, your publisher says, I'd like to have a series out of this?
Yeah, but that, don't let your publisher dictate your writing career. You have to, it has to be there. The passion has to be there, the interest has to be there. If not, they're gonna say, hey, this is great, everybody loved it, bring it back, and you not that interested in, you're gonna write 100 pages and you're gonna run out of gas, and you're gonna be pissed off, and your publisher's gonna be mad, everybody's gonna be mad. So let your own sort of gut dictate where you want to go with stuff. And the biggest gut instinct for me is, am I interested in the material? Am I interested in seeing those characters again? Do I have ideas that make sense for them to move that character forward, to evolve the character more? If not, then all you're going to be doing, and a lot of writers do this very successfully, you're going to be writing the same story and just changing some of the names of the peripheral characters. And you're just going to have the same character and they're doing the same thing they do in every book. And if you want to do that, that's terrific. And if you want to build a career out of that, for me, that would get stale pretty quickly. I've been in this business a long time. I've written over 50 books. And the one thing I always try to do is get myself out of my comfort zone with every project. And even if I'm bringing a character back, I try to put them into new territories with new partners doing new things, because I do not want to repeat myself.
So is that something, that autonomy that you're talking about, is that something that every writer ought to have? Or do you think, like, new writers are more susceptible to being directed in some sort of direction?
Well, I think that you can be very susceptible to that, because look, if you've got a book under your belt and it's done well and you're all excited and you have trusted advisors around you, and I'm not saying anything's wrong with it. I have a great agent, I have great publishers, around the world, and I listen to them, but for a lot of different things, marketing and business points and things and sales, and what they would like me to do on tour. And that's great. And yes, they can have input into whether they think this character is great, it might be great in another book. But the answer you have to ask yourself, the question you have to ask yourself, and the answer is it there for me? If I'm only going to bring this character back because my publisher or my agent or the readers want me to, but the passion and fascination with the character is not there, it's not going to be a good book, and nobody's going to be happy with the result. But if the greatest problem to have is that the agent loves it, the publisher loves it, the readers love it, and you do too, and you want to bring it back again, you have all the same level of energy that you had with the first one. That's a terrific opportunity for you. But I just think that the buck stops with the writer, because who's going to be writing the book? Not the publisher, not the agent, not the readers out there. You have to sit down every day and deal with this character. And if you're dealing with the character because somebody else told you would be a great idea, I don't know how that's going to turn out.
Well, I get a lot of, when I founded Killer Nashville, which is a writers conference, and a lot of the people who come to our conference say, I've got an idea for a trilogy, and I'm going to write this trilogy. Is that really the best way for a writer to approach it? Because I keep thinking, and this is just me, I want to hear your view, but I keep thinking the first book may flop, and so 2 and 3 are not. So the trilogy's over. So what's your perspective?
If you go into a preconceived notion about how many books is going to be in a series, you're either going to drastically undercount it or overcount it. That's just the way it is. Until you get into the pages, into the characters, it may sound like a terrific storyline, and it may sound like a character you want to spend 3, 4, 5, 6 books with. But until you get into the trenches with that character writing the pages, that's why I tell people, if you want to write from an outline, that's fine. I mean, I don't write from outlines. I don't outline everything in the book because there are no surprises left for me. Plus, there are two ways to learn how to drive a Formula One car. You can read a book about how to drive one, or you can drive one. And let me tell you, the experiences are vastly different. So you can write an outline where everything seems neat and organized, and each plot dovetails on the next plot, and everything comes out great in the end. And then you get into the messy, dirty, chaotic, fractious world of actually writing the novel, and you realize that it has no elements that the outline had, because it just didn't work once you get into the trenches of actually putting it all together. And you may get in 10 pages in and go, this character I thought was going to be a peripheral character, I'm actually more taken with him or her than I was with the character I thought was going to lead the narrative. Then what do? Do you listen to your outline, or do you listen to what your gut is telling you after spending some time with these characters? So the same thing with, the number of books in a series. Forget about that. Writing a book is hard enough without thinking about, I have 2 more after this and then I'm done. Well, if you get to the 3rd one and you have a lot left to explore in that character, you're just going to stop. Latitude and flexibility are your friends. Being static, being preconceived, being inflexible are your enemies when it comes to writing, and much in life, actually.
So in terms of writing a series, when you decide I'm going to do another book, how does that affect in terms of the long-term series plot Bible, or whatever you want to call it? How do you organize all of that?
So I'll give you an example. Let's talk through the Camel Club. I did 5 Camel Club books. They're an ensemble cast of sort of these conspiracy theorists that have a little bit of age on them, a little bit of experience. They're all like in their 50s and 60s. And the first book was entitled Camel Club, and they're based in Washington, D.C. And they stumble upon these conspiracies, and they have to bring skills that they've learned over their lives to bear on this, to try to, bring out the truth and make sure people are held accountable. So I finished the first one, but the first thing I did in that book, I built 5 characters into that book, plus a Secret Service agent and a couple of other peripheral characters who actually had some substance and weight. So I had 5 sort of fascinating backstories that I could then bleed into future books. I could explore, it's almost like you see some series like Bridgerton. The first season was totally focused on the Duke and the Duchess, and the second season was on the eldest brother, and the 3rd season is going to be on someone else. You can do it that way, where you sort of highlight a new character of an ensemble group in future books. I also like to, if I have one main character like an Amos Decker or Will Roby, I give them a lot of baggage in their own personal background that I then can exploit later in future books. Amos Decker suffers from hyperthymesia, perfect recall, and synesthesia because he had a brain trauma. He was hit on the football field and almost died from the blow to the head. And it changed the way his brain operates. So he has a lot of personal demons. And in every book, what I try to do with Decker is I show that his brain is constantly transforming itself because of the brain trauma. So every book he has to deal with something new happening in his own mind and his own personality, which continues to change on him. If you can imagine how difficult and frustrating that could be. Plus, I have new elements about how his mind works to come out in every novel. And I have a lot of personal baggage in his life. What happened to his family? What happened to his partner, his old partner? So if you're going to start a book and you really want it to be a series, you have to sort of build up that stuff, build up your powder in that first novel. It could be through backstories of one character or multiple characters that you're going to exploit in future books, or it could be something about a physical characteristic, an intellectual characteristic, or the people that he will meet in an ongoing basis because of the work that he does, and then can be exploited in the future books. So build it in, build your powder up in the first one, and let the powder off, but do it judiciously. You don't want to blow everything up in the first novel. You need to turn the tap on and turn it off, but be thinking about those things. And I call them Easter eggs. Sometimes you can lay Easter eggs throughout a series of books, and they'll only be resolved in future books. That's the difference between writing a standalone and writing a series. You sort of plant some things, you foreshadow some things in earlier books, and you can take advantage of them in later books.
In terms of developing all of this baggage that comes with them, is that something that comes organically, or do you sit and just kind of plot out the baggage this character is going to have?
You can do it both ways, and I've certainly done it both ways. With Decker, I'll give you 2 examples with Decker and with Will Roby. Decker, the thing that fascinated me about Decker was that when you suffer a traumatic brain injury, your brain can change dramatically, in both ways that you would think would happen to you, that your mental processes will be debilitated, but in some ways, your mental process can be facilitated and they can grow ever stronger. The brain is an interesting organ. When part of it is damaged, its function is to survive as best it can. So what it does, it often rewires itself. The brain is just a bunch of electrical currents. It rewires itself around damaged areas. And when it does that, it accesses area of the brain that even today in 2023, most scientists have no idea how the brain works. It's too much to understand. And it reaches and accesses certain parts of the brain like memory that most of us never take full advantage of. So I knew with Decker, that would give me two things that I could really think about. Forget all the other layers of baggage that I talked about. Two things that I could exploit with Decker. One, a phenomenal memory. And he was going to be a detective. So you can imagine what a memory like that would allow him to do. He can go into an event, into a crime scene, and see everything layer upon layer upon layer. Any inconsistency, either from forensics or from witness statements or from things he just observes, and he lays, it's like laying layer over top of layer, and all of a sudden here are inconsistencies because he remembers everything and forgets nothing. So that would give him both a fascinating sort of personal backstory, because it's fascinating that we all have things we'd rather forget. The bad things that happen to us, we'd like to forget them. He never can. So that gives you a little bit of reader sympathy for him. But two, it gives him an incredibly powerful tool as a detective. So sometimes you only need one or two hooks like that. I'm not saying going out and create 20 different baggage pots for different characters. That can be just too much, but one or two can take you a long way if you fully exploit them.
So you talk a lot about character. Do you have something that comes first for you, the character or the plot?
I've done it both ways. And I guess, again, I emphasize flexibility. I wrote a book years ago called The Winner because I was fascinated with it. When I was in law school, I wrote a paper about lotteries. When lotteries first started coming back into the vogue in the 70s and 80s, they had been banned for 100 years because they were all corrupt. And then they started coming back again. And back then, sort of truth in advertising laws didn't apply to the states. So, state lottery could say, everybody wins. Come on and play. It didn't have to be like Burger King. The odds of winning are 1 in 12 trillion. The states didn't apply. And I argued that the truth in advertising law should apply to states. And eventually it did, not because of what I did, but people just got common sense. So I was fascinated with lotteries. And if you look at every demographic and every statistic, the highest selling lottery sites are in the poorest sections of America. And the lowest selling lottery sites are in the most affluent areas of America. It makes kind of perfect sense, right? And that's more of a statement on the wealth imbalance in this country than anything else. So I wanted to write a story about the lottery. And I came to the way scientifically how someone could actually rig the lottery. And then I inhabited the characters. I thought of the characters to sort of execute the plot that I had come up with. In other books like Amos Decker or King and Maxwell, I came up with the characters first and then invented plots and storylines that would allow those characters to thrive and flourish and be challenged.
So when you're creating a new character, what's your process for that?
I really am much like, let's see how it goes. I don't sit down and do character personalities with 77 different, indicia of what this character should be, because one, it's overkill. And two, you're never going to remember it all. You're going to have to keep referring back to this checklist of stuff. And you're going to realize that, 93% of this, I don't even need or want in this person. Let me just wake this person up at the start of the day and walk him through what I want him to do. Let's see what he does. Let's see how this stuff ticks. And then you start sort of, you got this blob of clay, you spend a little time with it, and then you start chipping some stuff off here. And let me make this a little more familiar to people. And let me, see how the world that I've created for him and I'm putting him through or her through is shaping him or her. And then we'll figure out what sort of personality flaws and interesting personality facets this person might have. It's always important, I think, before you try to do these character sketches and everything, to put them into the world that they're going to be in for 400 plus pages, and let's see how it works out. And you can do it for 50, 60, 70 pages, and then all of a sudden you're going to get a better feel for this character, about how they actually should come across to the reader and what you think they're going to need in order to get through this novel in a plausible way. I early on, I did the personality sketches, I did chapter outlines, and I just realized that none of it really was working for me. I just really prefer to grow organically. And I have nothing against anybody who likes to outline. I have lots of best-selling friends who outline their books from A to Z. They know the ending, they're going to write the book, and that's perfectly fine. It works for them, it works for them. My only advice is you don't have to do it one way. You can do it lots of different ways. And what works for someone else may not work for you. And during the course of your career, if you're fortunate to have a long career, your process actually may change a little bit. You may become more outline oriented or less outline oriented the further along you go, because there's no perfect way to do this. You just sort of jump in, you have a little bit of structure about how you want to spend your day, things you want to accomplish, things you want to write out, things that you might see coming up ahead, and then go from there.
Yeah. When you're doing a series, do you have some sort of series arc that's going on as well as the book arc with the characters?
I have much more character arc than I do book arc. So I'll give you, just to be very clear, when I finish an Amos Decker or King and Maxwell or Aloysius Archer, I have no idea what the next plot's going to be for them. I haven't, done a series arc Bible like you would in a TV series. And I don't really want that, because I won't be with that character for a while. I'm off working on something else. So why do I want to be so hyper focused on what's coming up next? That allows me some distance from the book that I just wrote the character. And in my mind, I know, okay, the first book, Archer did this. In the second book, he got his, detective's license, and he was working with really good detective, mentoring and learning the trade. The third book, he's now a full-fledged detective in LA in 1953, and he got this murder investigation under his belt, and all these things happened to him. Okay, I know all of that, right? So it's much better for me to know all these factors. Then I can, when I go back to look at what I want to do with the next, I'm like, okay, here's what's happened to him in these 3 books so far. What makes sense for me and for the character and for the sort of evolution of the character that I want for him? Where does he go next? What's the next case for him to investigate? It might not have a whole lot to do with him. It might be something that's interesting that I read about that was happening in the 1950s in LA, some type of particular crime, some type of particular murder that might sort of inspire me to come up with something else for him to sort of jump into. What was happening during that time period that Archie might have become involved in, and how he might investigate it? So that works a lot better for me, because I know if I sit down with a piece of paper and go book 1, book 2, book 3, book 12, I'm never going to use any of that. It's just a total waste of time. At least it is for me. For other people, God bless them, if they can do that, do it. But for me, it's just a total waste of time. It's much better for me, once I get focused on the next book with this character, to sit back, evaluate where he's come from, where he got to in the last book, and what might be interesting for him to do in the future. That I'm also interested and fascinated in. And then let's just take a little bit of research, a little bit of reading, a little bit of like what was going on back then. And what kind of crime might be interested in, what sort of characters might populate that type of structure, that strata of society where this crime is happening. And can I get enough subplots out of that, enough interesting characters out of that to keep him engaged and me engaged, and ultimately the reader engaged?
When you go through and you get 60 pages in and you've learned your character and learned all these new things and see some new plot, do you go back and start over, or do you keep going from that point forward and then come back and do the whole thing again?
I typically keep going over like the first probably 10 or 12 chapters over and over again as I'm writing a novel. And I always, when I go back and I'm going to start writing for a new day, I always go back and read a few of the previous chapters to get me back in tune to the characters, to the plot, where I'm going, where I think I might want to go after that. I am hyper focused on those initial chapters because they're critically important to set the tone, pace, style, and narration of the novel. I want readers to know that I'm firmly in control of the story. They don't have to sit there and try to second guess me or try to figure out where it's going before me. I want them to sit back, know they're in the hands of somebody who does this for a living, and just enjoy the show. And I don't want to be tripped up. If somebody finds something wrong or an inconsistency in those early pages, they've lost all faith with you. And that's not a good thing, because then all of a sudden they're not going to be a reader anymore. They're just going to be an evaluator. And that's not what you want. You don't want them looking for the next mistake. So that's really critical to get those, make sure all the pages are pristine, but certainly the early ones too. But with that said, um, I I focus a lot on going forward in the novel, but in order to go forward in a really plausible, consistent way, you really have to remember where you've been, where you've come from. So reviewing those earlier pages time and time again as you're writing future pages, I've always found that to be a very productive exercise.
How far ahead do you see when you are writing? Do you just wait and discover it as you're typing, or do you go for a long walk and then come in and write? What I mean, what how far ahead do you see?
Well, I'll give you an example. I'm working on a book right now. It's a sequel to the 620 Man that came out last summer. And I had some initial fits and start where I'd set this book in a different place with a different plot. And I just wasn't feeling it. Week after week, I was like, there's nothing, compelling me to sit down in front of a computer and write any more of this. So I just dumped it. I just kind of cut my losses and moved on to something new for him to do. And now I'm really on a roll, almost at 100 pages. And that's, like in a week and a half, which is always a good sign for me. If I write fast, it's really a good sign for me because it means I'm totally engaged in the story. So for me, at this juncture in the story, I have a number of subplots that are flowing. Subplots really actually might rise to the level of primary plots. Doesn't mean you only can have one in any story. You can have more than one primary plot. And even though I'm writing, I'm nearing page 100, I'm also thinking about possible, okay, let's think down the road of who's behind this, who's behind that, what twist might I come up with to sort of explain what's going on with this character and this plot. And let's narrow down a little bit closer about like who's behind some of this and who's not, where's the red herrings, what's the misdirection, where do I want to lead the reader down, which path and disguise the real path. So I am thinking about all those things at the same time, and that will sort of tell me, okay, this is how I'm going to write this scene, this is how I'm going to write this string of chapters, because this is necessary for me to sort of get to the progress stage that I want to get to and get to the points that I want to get to. At some point, I can write any novel, so where I get close to the end, I have multiple choices about where I want it to go, because the basic structure of the thing remains the same regardless of who might be behind it, what the big reveal is. You may have to go back and change a few details along the way, but the superstructure, like building the outside of a yacht, the superstructure remains the same. The interior details will always be manipulated, but they'll get you to the same result at the end, but maybe with someone else, a different person being behind it all. And that's really how I run when I'm sort of putting this all together.
So how perfectionistic are you in terms of like the language? I mean, do you go over uh, the way it reads several times? Is that in a polish? Is that in a draft? How many drafts do you do? Writers always want to know how many drafts am I supposed to do before the thing is finished,
Yeah, yeah. And that number is different for everybody. Everybody writes differently. I would say that I probably go through like a dozen drafts before all is said and done, and then it goes into, the last round of, I call it heavy lifting editing, where you get not copy editing, but the phase before that, where you get thematic editing, and drilling down more deep, the characters and some of the action, not action, but just some of the narrative that takes place in the plot. I learned a really good lesson when I was a lawyer, as a trial lawyer. I had a case, we were representing a client in Texas, and the defendant we were suing had caused damage to our client in Texas. And we were trying to sue that defendant in Texas, and they said under long-arm jurisdiction, which is the way that states can get jurisdiction over other people even if they don't live there, you have to have certain contacts and connections with the state, so then you can be sued there. Like a huge corporation like Amazon, they do business in every state. If Amazon hurts you in a state, you can sue them in any state. But other businesses, it's different. They can say, we don't even have an office there. We just go there every once in a while. You can't sue us there. You have to come and sue us where we are in New York or whatever. So I remember writing a brief that we argued in federal court in Texas, and I agonized over this verb. And I finally said, the great state of Texas should not allow the defendant to flit in and out of Texas at its own whim and for its own benefit with no accountability whatsoever. And I know that word resonated with the judge because in his order, he said the defendant should not be allowed to flit in and out of Texas. He used that verb. And for me, that told me all I needed to know about. Did I take too much time to think of that word? No, I didn't, because obviously that probably carried the day. And flit is a great word when you're trying to show something like that. They just come and go as they want. with all the benefit and none of the accountability. So language for me is very important, and I try to be as original with it as I possibly can be. I try to avoid cliches if at all possible. I read the dialogue out loud to make sure that it sounds real and not wooden. And I try to do as much as I can to make sure that, the clunky sentences, even though you're never going to get all of them out of it, as many of them are out of it as possible. The language is streamlined. I don't use the SARS because I don't want to look for a word to make me sound smarter than I actually am. I just want to write stuff that sounds natural and real, and what people would say. And I think clarity above all is what I strive for. I don't, if I wrote a paragraph, there was 100 words, I know that I can write that paragraph far better and make it 10 words. So that's what I strive for. Brevity and clarity.
If you had one bit of advice about plot, if a writer, if you were going to give a writer one bit of advice about plot, what would you say?
You're not overcomplicated. You may think that you're telegraphing everything because you know every detail of the plot. So if you're trying to write the story such that in the end you yourself are also confused, the reader will be lost by page 50. So streamline the plot, and understand that even when you do streamline to the point where you, the writer, think it's so totally simplistic, the reader will look at it and go, wow, that was really complicated. Guaranteed that will be the reaction.
Okay, and a flip question, but the same thing. What advice would you give about creating characters?
Understand that when you create a character, it's almost like adopting someone into your family. You're going to be spending a lot of time with that person on a very personal basis. And you need to make sure that it's the sort of person you want to hang out with for a while, and that you feel passionate interest about what they're going to be doing in the novel. Never write about a white knight, because I don't know one and nobody else in the whole world does either, and they're boring. So make sure that the character is the only opportunity you get to connect with a reader on a human level. The plot does not do that for you. The characters do. So if you write a character who never makes a mistake, you're going to lose the reader by page 10. If you have a character who gets knocked down and then gets back up and tries to keep going, you're going to have the readers in your pocket.
Any bit of closing advice to new writers that you'd like to give?
Keep in mind, I know the gauntlet that beginning writers have to go through. I know it's tough and hard, and it's probably harder now than when I started out. Fewer publishers and lots of other things. But know that the industry will always need new, fresh voices. Us guys and gals are not going to be writing forever. And people always want stories, they always want content, and they always want fascinating characters. So you will always have a shot, but make sure you go into it with a lot of excitement and enthusiasm, to be practical about it too. And ask yourself, why do I want to write? If the answer is I hate my day job, that's not a great answer, because you're never going to be able to get through that gauntlet of rejections and just negativity that we all had to encounter. If your answer is I really love storytelling, I love spending my days with words, and that's really good, because then that's going to be like body armor. When you get rejected, it's just going to bounce off you. It's not going to kill you. So go into it for the right reasons. It's a gift to be able to tell a story. It's a privilege to be able to do it. I love doing it. It's not for everybody, but know that this world will always need new storytellers, and keep working hard. And one day, maybe I'll be standing in line to get a book signed by you.